Hi, welcome to my channel. In this video, I show how I use an old antique photograph album and turn it into 4 tunnel books. The album itself is pretty large and thick. Here I know I have to remove some of the pages. Otherwise, the book will become too gator mouth. And I'm just removing the pages with an X-Acto knife. I know I want to fit 4 different tunnel books into this one album. You can see here's the remaining stub after I remove the page. I'm calling them pages, but they're really about almost 1/8 inch thick cardboard. In reality, I ended up removing an additional 3 pages than what is shown here. As I began working on the book, I could tell it was going to become too gator mouth and more page removal was going to be required. For the next step, I covered the digital pages with a clear gel medium to make them look more painterly. I also used some embossing glaze to highlight some of the more colorful section of the pages. The first step in this process requires using an embossing pen. I tried to use an embossing glaze whose color was similar to the section that I was trying to emboss. Here I added the glazing to the orange and blue areas of the page. I also used regular embossing powder to add the gold to the stems of the flowers. I used metallic thread to also stitch over some of the stems just to give the page a little bit more interest. I knew I wanted to add some ribbon around the borders of the page, so before I glued the page in, I wanted to make sure I completed the sewing step before gluing it into the book. You can always use glue if you forget. Washi tape is also an option rather than ribbon. I tried to plan out which pages were going to go where in the booklet. I just used a varnish, any kind of gel medium would do, regular glue, whatever your preference is. I am gluing over the photo or the cabinet card here. Rather than cut something out of cardboard or cardstock to fill up that space, I just went through my cabinet cards and pulled out some that I knew I would never use. You might think that's sacrilegious, but I have so many cabinet cards I'll never use up in a lifetime. Here I'm gluing in a left-hand page that does not have a window, so it's not part of this section's tunnel. This is just one example of an embellishment that I made to help decorate the pages. I started with a gold pen, but since I had my embossing powders out, I decided to emboss some of the areas. I'll add a link to the end of this video showing how I made these wax seal UV resin embellishments. Here I've just added washi tape around the border of the page. The paper frames you see are ones that I've embellished by running them through an embossing folder, then adding some gilding wax, followed by some metal pieces that I had from some metal trim. I have a 2-minute tutorial showing the entire process that I'll link to at the end of this video. When cutting the windows for the tunnel pages, don't assume that each margin is the same distance. In my book, there was about a 1/4 inch difference, and had I not caught that early on, I would have had to have redone many of the pages. Also to keep a lookout for is an odd size window that your photograph album might contain. You'll see in a few seconds where there's an unusually long window here that I had to compensate for. I basically just used my standard opening to cover up the extra long part. Here I'm inserting another unwanted cabinet card into the page upon which I will glue one of the portraits that make up the last page of this tunnel section. I'm inserting the unwanted cabinet card prior to pasting on my paper. Otherwise, I would paste over the slot that allows me to slide the cabinet card in. As a precaution, I'm adding some glue to the cabinet card to prevent it from moving in the future. To age the portraits, I've coated each of them with some antique linen embossing glaze. Here I'm using a dauber to apply the embossing glue, followed by the embossing glaze powder. And here I'm melting it with my heat gun. I also applied some gel medium to give the portraits a more painterly look, but they turned out glossier than I had wanted, so I ended up spraying the portraits with some matte clear coating. I coated the backs of the appliques that I'm using in the book with some clear gesso. Make sure it's clear, not white. You could also use any kind of gel medium. Basically what I'm trying to do is stiffen up the appliques as well as to secure the threads or beads that might come off once I cut the appliques apart. I added border corners to all of the right-hand portrait pages. Again, I ran them through an embossing folder, used some gilding wax to highlight the raised edges. All of the background pages, portraits, and these corner borders are digitals that were made by Patty Lang of Sacred Mementos. Next, I'm planning on where to place the appliques. You want them to extend into the portrait area, keeping in mind that when you flip the page, you also want them to highlight the page that's on the left-hand side. Before gluing on the portrait, I'm adding some beading around the frame. Adding more trim and embellishments. Here are the finished pages for the first queen. It should be noted that the next three queens will have one less tunnel page to reduce the bulk of the overall book. This will make more sense if you view the flip through of the finished book. Following are the steps that I used to embellish the cover. I painted these chipboard elements gold and then applied some gilding wax. I chose these buttons because they had a coat of arms on them. To attach them to the chipboard, I punched a hole in the chipboard. Applied some E6000 glue. And used some wire to help secure it in place. The cover of the book is very thick, so I then use an X-Acto knife to help cut out some of the thickness so that the shank of the button would fit more firmly into the cover. I used E6000 to glue it to the cover, as well as some hot glue. The hot glue was just so that it would dry very fast, allowing the E6000 to set up over time. Cardstock die cut with gilding wax applied was used for the center of the book. And here's the finished cover. At the end of this video, as well as in the description, I'll link to a flip through of the finished tunnel book showing all 4 sections, as well as a couple of the tutorials that I mentioned in this process video. Thank you for watching.